The steel of the revolvers caught the morning light streaming through Violet's kitchen window. Two weapons of death laid carefully on her worn wooden table by hands that had carried them for far too long. Bennett Bradford stood before her with dust still clinging to his leather vest and exhaustion carved deep into the lines around his eyes, his voice rough as he spoke words she had waited 3 years to hear. "I'm done carrying these for you." Violet Kowalski felt her breath catch in her throat, her flour-dusted hands frozen above the biscuit dough she had been kneading. The year was 1882, and Ouray, Colorado had carved itself into the San Juan Mountains as a silver mining town where fortunes rose and fell with the unpredictability of mountain weather. She had lived here for 5 years now, ever since her father's claim had brought their family west from Pennsylvania, and in all that time she had never expected to see Bennett Bradford walk through her door, much less lay down the weapons he had carried in her brother's name. "Bennett," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the wood stove. "What are you saying?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his dark eyes that made her heart pound against her ribs like a wild thing seeking freedom. Bennett was 26 years old, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that touched his collar, and a face that would have been handsome if not for the hardness that 3 years of hunting had etched into his features. He had ridden out of Ouray the day after her brother Thomas had been murdered by the Fletcher gang, promising her dying father that he would bring justice to those who had spilled Kowalski blood. "I'm saying that I kept my promise to your father," Bennett said, his voice steady despite the tremor she could see in his hands as he pulled them away from the revolvers. "Every last one of them is dead or in prison. The Fletcher brothers, their associates, everyone who had a hand in what happened to Thomas. It's done, Violet. It's finally done." Violet felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She was 23 years old and had learned to be strong in the 5 years since her mother had died of pneumonia during their first winter in Colorado. Her father had followed 2 years later, his heart giving out from grief over Thomas's murder. She had been alone in this house for a year now, running the small restaurant she had built from her mother's recipes, serving miners and travelers who passed through Ouray on their way to somewhere else. "You came back," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I told you I would." Bennett took a step toward her, then seemed to think better of it and stopped. "I made a promise to your father before he died. I made a promise to you. I don't break my word, Violet." She remembered that day with painful clarity. Her father had been lying in his bed, his face gray with pain, his breathing labored. Thomas had been dead for 3 days, buried on the hill overlooking the town. Bennett had knelt beside the bed, his hat in his hands, and sworn on everything he held sacred that he would track down every member of the Fletcher gang and make them pay for what they had done. Her father had died that night with peace in his eyes because he believed Bennett Bradford was a man of his word. 3 years, Violet said, finally finding her voice. "You have been gone for 3 years, Bennett. I thought maybe you were dead. I thought maybe they had killed you too." "There were times I thought the same," he admitted. His hand moved unconsciously to his side and she saw him wince. "Can I sit down? I rode through the night to get here." "Of course." She moved quickly, gesturing to one of the chairs at the table, carefully avoiding the revolvers that seemed to dominate the space between them. "Let me get you some coffee. Have you eaten?" "Not since yesterday morning." He sank into the chair with a grunt of relief, and she could see now that he was favoring his left side. There was blood on his shirt, barely visible against the dark fabric, but she had tended enough injuries in her time to recognize the signs. "You are hurt," she said sharply, abandoning the coffee to move closer to him. "Let me see." It's nothing serious. Just a graze from our last encounter with the Fletcher brothers' cousin in New Mexico territory. He did not appreciate me bringing his kin to justice. Take off your vest, Violet ordered, her hands already reaching for the buckles. Bennett caught her wrists gently, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. Violet, I am fine. It has already been stitched and bandaged. I just need food and rest. His eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that made her pulse quicken. I need to know that you are all right, that you have been safe while I was gone. I have been safe, she said quietly, pulling her hands free and stepping back to put some distance between them. The touch of his skin against hers had sent electricity racing through her veins, and she needed space to think clearly. Ouray is a good town. People look out for each other, and I have built a decent business with the restaurant. I serve breakfast and dinner to miners and travelers. It keeps me busy. Your mother would be proud. Bennett's voice was soft. She always said you had a gift for cooking. Violet turned away to hide the fresh tears that threatened. She busied herself with pouring coffee and pulling out the pot of stew she had made yesterday, still warm on the back of the stove. She cut thick slices of bread and set everything before Bennett with practiced efficiency, then finally allowed herself to sit down across from him. He ate like a man who had been living on hardtack and jerky for months, which he probably had. She watched him in silence, taking in the changes 3 years had wrought. He was leaner than she remembered, harder, with new scars visible on his hands and a tightness around his mouth that spoke of pain both physical and otherwise. But underneath it all, he was still Bennett Bradford, the young cowboy who had worked her father's claim and made Thomas laugh with his stories of growing up on a ranch in Texas. "Tell me," she said finally, when he had finished eating and was working on his second cup of coffee. "Tell me everything." Bennett set down his cup and looked at the revolvers on the table. "Are you sure you want to know? I have waited 3 years. I deserve to know." He nodded slowly. "You are right. You do." He took a breath and began. "I tracked them south first into New Mexico territory. The Fletcher brothers had a hideout near Las Vegas, working with a group of cattle rustlers. I spent 6 months getting close to them, working as a hired gun until they trusted me enough to let me into their confidence. When the time was right, I testified against them. The law hanged Garrett Fletcher, and his brother Marcus got 30 years in prison. Violet felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. Garrett Fletcher had been the one who shot Thomas in the back outside the saloon. And the others. Jack Cooper died in a shootout with the sheriff in Arizona territory. Billy Crane was shot trying to escape from prison. The remaining members scattered. I hunted them one by one. Some came peaceful, others. He trailed off, his eyes distant. Others did not give me a choice. "How many did you kill?" The question came out before she could stop it. Bennett's jaw tightened. 4. I killed 4 men, Violet, 4 men who would rather die than face justice for what they did, and I will carry that weight for the rest of my days. She reached across the table without thinking, placing her hand over his. "You did what you had to do, what my father asked you to do. Did I?" His eyes met hers, and she saw the torment there. "Or did I become the very thing I was hunting? I have spent 3 years living by these revolvers." He gestured to the weapons on the table. 3 years where every decision came down to who was faster, who was more willing to kill. I have seen things, done things, that no man should have to do, and all of it was in your name, Violet. All of it was because I made a promise to your father and to you, Bennett. She did not know what to say. The weight of his words pressed down on her, the realization of what he had sacrificed for her family's honor. "When your father asked me to bring justice for Thomas, I said yes, because I loved your brother like he was my own blood," Bennett continued, his voice rough with emotion. Thomas and I rode together, worked together, laughed together. He was the best friend I ever had. But that is not why I spent 3 years tracking down every last member of that gang. Violet's hand trembled in his. Then why? Because of you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Because I could not bear to see the grief in your eyes. Because every night when I made camp under the stars, I thought about you here in Ouray, alone and grieving, and I knew I would not rest until I had fulfilled my promise. Because somewhere along the way, hunting down those men became less about justice for Thomas and more about proving to you that I am a man worthy of your regard. Her breath caught. What are you saying? Bennett stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across the kitchen floor. I am saying that I have been half in love with you since the day I met you 5 years ago. I am saying that when your father asked me to avenge Thomas, I saw it as my chance to prove myself to you. I am saying that I laid those revolvers on your table because I am done being a hunter, a killer, a man defined by violence. I want to be something different, someone different. Violet rose from her chair, her legs unsteady. 5 years ago, Bennett Bradford had arrived in Ouray as part of a cattle drive passing through. He had been 21 years old, full of stories and laughter, and he had stayed on to work her father's claim when Thomas had needed an extra hand. She remembered thinking he was handsome, remembered the way her heart had fluttered when he smiled at her, but there had never been time for courtship. Her mother had been ill, the claim had demanded constant attention, and then everything had fallen apart. I did not know, she whispered. All this time I thought you left because of your promise to my father. I did not know you had feelings for me. How could I tell you? Bennett turned from the window to face her. Your brother had just been murdered. Your father was dying. You needed someone to bring justice, not someone to court you. So I left and I did what needed to be done, and I told myself that maybe when it was over, if I survived, I would come back and tell you the truth. And now you are here. And now I am here. He took a step toward her. But I am not the same man who left, Violet. I have blood on my hands. I have killed men. I have lived rough and hard with violence as my constant companion. I would understand if you wanted nothing to do with me now. I would understand if you asked me to take those revolvers and leave and never come back. Violet looked at the revolvers on her kitchen table, then back at Bennett's face. She saw the hope there, fragile and desperate, mixed with fear. This was a man who had faced down killers and outlaws without flinching, but the thought of her rejection terrified him. You know what I have thought about every day for the past 3 years? She asked quietly. I have thought about whether you were alive or dead. I have thought about the promise you made and whether it would cost you your life. I have thought about the last thing you said to me before you rode out of town. I told you I would come back. You told me to wait for you. The memory was crystal clear. He had stood beside his horse in the pre-dawn darkness, ready to ride out on the trail of the Fletcher gang. She had come to see him off, wrapped in a shawl against the cold, and he had looked at her with those dark eyes and said, "Wait for me, Violet, I will come back." Did you? His voice was barely a whisper. Wait for me. What do you think? She moved closer to him, close enough that she could smell the dust and leather and sweat that clung to him. Do you think I built my restaurant and lived alone in this house and turned away every man who tried to court me because I enjoy being lonely? I waited, Bennett. I waited because you asked me to, and because some part of me knew that if you were still alive, you would keep your word. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. Violet. But I will not wait any more, she continued, her voice stronger now. I will not wait for you to decide if you are worthy. I will not wait for you to work through your guilt and your demons on your own. If you meant what you said, if you truly want to be something different, then you stay here. You stay with me. We figure it out together." "I have nothing to offer you," he said, but his hand remained on her cheek, warm and solid. "I have spent everything I had hunting the Fletcher gang. I have no land, no money, no prospects. All I have is these." He gestured to the revolvers. "And I swear to you I am done with them. I will not live by the gun anymore." "Then we will build something new," Violet said firmly. "I have this house. I have my restaurant. Ouray is growing every day with the silver mines. There is opportunity here for anyone willing to work hard." "You are a good man, Bennett Bradford, no matter what you have had to do these past 3 years. And if you meant what you said about your feelings for me, then I am telling you that I feel the same way. I have felt the same way for a long time." His other hand came up to frame her face, and she saw wonder dawn in his eyes. "You mean that?" "I mean it." She lifted her hands to cover his. "I am done being alone. I am done grieving. I am done waiting. You came back to me, Bennett. You kept your promise. Now let me help you keep the promise you just made to yourself." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste pecks she had received from boys trying to court her. It was desperate and tender and full of 3 years of longing. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. He tasted like coffee and trailed dust and hope, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw that the haunted look in his eyes had eased just a little. "I do not deserve you," he murmured against her hair. "Probably not," she agreed, surprising a laugh out of him. "But you have me anyway. Now sit back down and finish your coffee while I figure out what we are going to do with those revolvers." Bennett returned to his chair, but this time when Violet sat down, she chose the chair beside him instead of across from him. His hand found hers on the table, their fingers intertwining naturally. "I thought about selling them," he said, looking at the weapons. "They are fine pieces worth good money, but they feel cursed somehow, like they carry the weight of everything I did with them." "Then we will not sell them," Violet decided. "We will put them away somewhere safe, lock them up. Maybe someday you will feel different about them, but until then they can just be tools that we do not need." "I like the way you think." Bennett squeezed her hand. "What about your restaurant? Will my being here cause problems for your business?" "Why would it?" She looked at him in confusion. "People know I went after the Fletcher gang. Some will call me a hero, others will call me a killer. Either way, there will be talk about you taking up with me." Violet snorted. "Let them talk. This is my house and my business. Anyone who has a problem with who I choose to spend my time with can eat somewhere else." She paused, then added more softly, "Besides, you are not just taking up here. If we are doing this, we are doing it properly. You are courting me, Bennett Bradford, officially and openly. And when enough time has passed, and we are both certain, we will get married. I will not have people gossiping that I am running a house of ill repute." A slow smile spread across Bennett's face, the first genuine smile she had seen since he walked through her door. It transformed him, reminding her of the young cowboy who had made her heart flutter 5 years ago. "You have it all planned out, do you?" "Someone has to," she said primly. "You have been living by your guns for 3 years. You are probably terrible at planning anything that does not involve tracking someone down." He laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise him as much as it delighted her. "You are not wrong. All right, Violet Kowalski, I am officially courting you. What do we do first?" "First, you go to the hotel and get yourself a room. Then you clean up, get some real rest, and meet me back here tomorrow morning. I will make you breakfast and we can talk about what comes next." "I could stay here tonight," he suggested tentatively. "Sleep on the floor if you have a spare blanket. I have slept in worse places." "I am sure you have," Violet said, but you are courting me now, and that means propriety. The hotel is 2 blocks down. They have real beds and hot water for washing. You need both." Bennett sighed but nodded. "You are going to keep me in line, aren't you?" "Someone has to," she repeated, echoing his earlier words with a smile. "Now go. I have lunch preparations to start and you need rest. Come back tomorrow at dawn. I will have coffee ready." He stood reluctantly, then seemed to remember something and pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. "I did not spend everything," he said, setting it on the table. "There were bounties on some of the Fletcher gang members. I want you to have this." Violet pushed the pouch back toward him. "That is your money. You earned it." "I earned it for you," he insisted. "For your family. Thomas was my friend and your father gave me purpose when I needed it. Please, Violet, take it." She could see that this was important to him, a way of honoring his promise and providing for her even though she did not need his money. So she nodded and pulled the pouch toward her. "We will put it toward our future," she said, "whatever that may be." The smile he gave her was worth any amount of gold. He picked up his hat from where he had left it on the chair and settled it on his head, then looked at the revolvers one more time. "Leave them," Violet said. "I will put them away. You do not need to touch them again." Something in his expression shifted, relief and gratitude mixing with an emotion she could not quite name. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything, for waiting, for giving me a chance, for seeing past what I became to find who I want to be." "You never became anything but what you needed to be to keep your promise," Violet told him. "And now you get to become something new. We both do." After Bennett left, Violet carefully wrapped the revolvers in a clean cloth and carried them upstairs to the small room that had been her father's. She placed them in the bottom of his old trunk, under layers of clothes and papers she had not yet been able to sort through. The weight of them seemed to lessen once they were out of sight, as though the kitchen could breathe easier without them. She returned downstairs and stood in the empty kitchen, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. Bennett Bradford was back. Bennett Bradford loved her. Bennett Bradford wanted to build a life with her. The knowledge filled her with a joy so fierce it almost frightened her. But underneath, the joy was concern. She had seen the shadows in his eyes, the way he flinched when he talked about the men he had killed. 3 years of violence would not be erased overnight, no matter how much he wanted to put it behind him. He would need patience, understanding, and time to heal. She would need to be strong enough for both of them, while he found his footing in this new life he wanted to build. The door to her restaurant opened right on schedule at noon, and Violet pushed her personal thoughts aside to focus on work. The miners came in a steady stream, hungry and tired from their shifts, looking for hot food and a friendly face. She served them stew and bread and listened to their stories, laughed at their jokes, and accepted their coins with a smile. This was the life she had built for herself, and it was good. But now it had the promise of becoming something even better. That evening, after the last customer had left and she had cleaned the kitchen, Violet sat at her table with a cup of tea and allowed herself to really think about the future. Bennett would need work, something to occupy his hands and mind that had nothing to do with guns or violence. Ouray was full of opportunities for a man willing to work hard. The mines were always hiring, but she could not see Bennett spending his days underground. He was a man who needed sky and space, who had grown up on a ranch and knew animals and open country. There were ranches in the valleys around Ouray, cattle operations that supplied beef to the mining town's growing population. Maybe one of them would hire him on. Or perhaps they could expand her restaurant, turn it into something bigger. Bennett could help with that, use his strength for building and hauling instead of hunting. The possibilities spun through her mind as she prepared for bed, and when she finally lay down, She found herself smiling into the darkness. For the first time in 3 years, the future felt full of hope instead of just endurance. Bennett arrived on her doorstep, just as the sun was painting the eastern sky pink and gold. He looked better than he had yesterday, clean-shaven and wearing fresh clothes, though the exhaustion was still evident in the lines around his eyes. Violet welcomed him in and poured coffee while he settled at the kitchen table. "Did you sleep?" she asked, noting the shadows under his eyes. "Some," he admitted. "It is strange sleeping in a real bed again. I kept waking up thinking I needed to check my horse or keep watch." "That will pass," she said, hoping it was true. She set a plate of eggs and bacon and fried potatoes before him, along with fresh biscuits. "Eat. Then we talk." He ate more slowly than yesterday, savoring the food instead of wolfing it down. Violet sipped her coffee and watched him, cataloging all the small details she had missed in the emotional intensity of yesterday. The scar on his left hand that had not been there before. The way he held himself carefully, as though testing the limits of his injured side. The way his eyes kept darting to the door, an instinct born from years of watching his back. "Better?" she asked when he had finished. "Much. You are an incredible cook, Violet. Your mother taught you well." "She taught me that feeding people is an act of love," Violet said. "Whether it is family or customers or a cowboy who just rode back into your life after 3 years," Bennett's lips quirked. "Is that what I am? A cowboy who rode back into your life, among other things." She refilled his coffee and sat down across from him. "We need to talk about practical matters. If you are staying in Ouray, you will need work. The hotel is not cheap, and even with the money from the bounties, you cannot live there indefinitely." "I have been thinking about that," Bennett said. "I noticed on my way in yesterday that the livery stable has a help wanted sign up. I am good with horses. It would be honest work." "It would also pay poorly," Violet pointed out. "Tom Harris runs that stable, and he is notoriously cheap. You would barely make enough to cover your room and board." "I do not need much," Bennett said. "Just enough to live on while I am courting you properly. Once we are married, if we get married, things will be different. When we get married," Violet corrected. "Not if, and I have been thinking too. What if instead of you working for someone else, we expand the restaurant? I have been doing well enough on my own, but I have reached the limit of what one person can handle. With you to help, we could serve more customers, maybe even open for lunch as well as breakfast and dinner. We could split the work and the profits." Bennett looked surprised. "You would want me as a business partner? Why not? You are honest and hardworking, and I trust you. Plus, if we are courting with the intention of marriage, it makes sense to start building something together now." "I do not know anything about running a restaurant," he protested. "You do not need to cook," Violet assured him. "But you could help with other things. Taking orders, serving customers, handling supplies and deliveries, keeping the place clean and in good repair. All the things I do not have time for when I am busy in the kitchen." She could see him turning the idea over in his mind, testing it for flaws. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I could try it, if you are willing to teach me." "I am willing to teach you," she said. "But there is something else we need to discuss first. Bennett, what happened these past 3 years changed you. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself. You are not the same man who rode out of Ouray." His jaw tightened. "I know that. I told you yesterday I have done things, seen things that no man should have to endure. I wish I could be that young cowboy again, the one who made you smile, but I cannot erase the past 3 years." "I am not asking you to erase them," Violet said gently. "I am asking you to acknowledge them and deal with them. You cannot just lock those revolvers in a trunk and pretend they never existed. The memories, the guilt, the nightmares, they will not go away just because you want them to." What are you suggesting? I am suggesting that you talk about it. With me, with friends, with anyone who will listen. Do not keep it bottled up inside until it poisons everything good you are trying to build. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I dream about them sometimes, the men I killed. I see their faces, hear their last words. I wake up in the night with my heart pounding, reaching for guns that are not there. I tell myself it was justice, that I did what needed to be done, but sometimes in the dark hours before dawn, I wonder if I am any better than they were. Violet reached across the table and took his hand. You are better than they were. You know how I know. Because you care. Because it haunts you. Bad men do not lose sleep over the people they hurt. They do not question whether what they did was right. The fact that you are struggling with this tells me that your soul is still intact, Bennett. You just need time to heal. His fingers tightened around hers. What if I cannot heal? What if this is who I am now? Then we will deal with it together. But I do not believe that. I believe you are stronger than the darkness you have seen. I believe you can build a new life here, doing honest work and being part of a community. It will not be easy, and there will be hard days, but you will not be alone in it. She saw his eyes glisten with unshed tears, and felt her own throat tighten with emotion. This strong man who had faced down killers without flinching was breaking apart in her kitchen, allowing himself to be vulnerable in a way he probably had not been for 3 years. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. I do not deserve you, he said again. Stop saying that, Violet replied firmly. You do not get to decide what you deserve. You only get to decide what you do with what you have been given. And right now, you have been given a second chance. Do not waste it by wallowing in guilt. Bennett took a shaky breath and nodded. You are right. I am sorry. I have been alone with my thoughts for so long. It is strange having someone who cares. You better get used to it, she said with a small smile. Because I plan on caring for a very long time. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and comfortable. Bennett took a room at the boarding house down the street, cheaper than the hotel, and close enough to the restaurant that he could walk there in minutes. True to his word, he showed up every morning at dawn to help Violet prepare for the breakfast crowd. He was terrible at cooking, burning the bacon and over-salting the eggs until Violet finally banned him from the stove entirely. But he was good at everything else. He served customers with a quiet efficiency that put them at ease, handled complaints with patience, and kept the dining area spotlessly clean. He repaired the broken step on the front porch, fixed the leaky window in the kitchen, and built new shelves for storage that were more solid than anything Violet could have constructed herself. The customers took to him quickly. The miners appreciated his straightforward manner, and the fact that he did not hover or rush them through their meals. The few families in town liked that he was always patient with children, letting them pet his horse when he rode into town for supplies. And the women, Violet noted with amusement, definitely appreciated his rugged good looks and quiet competence. But Bennett only had eyes for Violet. He courted her with a single-minded focus that would have been overwhelming if it had not been so clearly genuine. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows outside town. He fixed things around her house without being asked. He listened when she talked about her dreams for the restaurant, offering suggestions and encouragement. And every evening, before he left to return to his boarding house, he would kiss her goodnight on the front porch with a tenderness that made her toes curl in her boots. There were hard days, too. Days when she would catch him staring into space with that haunted look in his eyes. Days when a sudden noise would make him flinch or reach instinctively for the gun he no longer wore. Days when he was short-tempered and withdrawn, battling demons only he could see. On those days, Violet would send him out on errands that required riding, knowing he needed the freedom of the open spaces to clear his head. Or she would close the restaurant early and they would walk together through Ouray, talking about nothing and everything until the shadows lifted from his eyes. She learned to read his moods, to know when he needed space and when he needed comfort, and slowly, gradually, she watched him begin to heal. 2 months after Bennett's return, they were closing up the restaurant for the night when Sheriff Patterson stopped by. He was a grizzled man in his 50s, fair but firm, and he had been sheriff of Ouray since the town was founded. "Evening, Miss Kowalski Bradford," he said, tipping his hat. "Mind if I have a word?" "Of course, Sheriff," Violet said, gesturing to a table. "Can I get you some coffee?" "That would be appreciated." He settled into a chair with a grunt, and Violet noticed he was favoring his right leg. Old injury, probably, acting up with the cooling weather. She poured 3 cups of coffee and sat down next to Bennett, who had gone very still. She could feel the tension radiating from him. "Relax, son," the sheriff said. "You are not in any trouble. In fact, I have been meaning to come by and talk to you for a while now. Just took me some time to verify a few things." "Verify what?" Bennett asked carefully. "Your story. About the Fletcher gang and what you have been doing for the past 3 years. Sheriff Patterson pulled out a stack of papers from his coat. "I have been corresponding with sheriffs in New Mexico Territory, Arizona, and Texas. Every one of them confirmed what you told Miss Kowalski. The Fletcher gang has been brought to justice, and you did it legal and proper. No vigilante killings, no taking the law into your own hands. You tracked them down and you brought them in to face the law, and when they did not give you a choice, you defended yourself. That is exactly how it should be done." Violet felt Bennett relax slightly beside her. "I appreciate you saying that, Sheriff." "I am not done," Patterson continued. "There is a matter of the reward money. See, there were bounties on the Fletcher gang that you never collected. Substantial bounties. I took the liberty of filing the claims on your behalf, seeing as you did the work. The money should be coming through in the next few weeks." Bennett blinked. "I collected the bounties. I gave that money to Violet." "You collected some of them," the sheriff corrected. "But there were others you missed. Garrett Fletcher alone had a $500 bounty on him from 3 different territories. His brother Marcus had another 300. All told, Bradford, you are looking at close to $2,000 once all the claims are processed." Violet gasped. $2,000 was a fortune, more money than most people in Ouray would see in 5 years of hard work. "I do not want it," Bennett said flatly. "That money was paid for killing. I am done with that life." "Son, this money is not blood money," Sheriff Patterson said patiently. "This is reward money, legally offered by territorial governments for bringing dangerous criminals to justice. You earned it fair and square, and I suspect Miss Kowalski here could think of a few good uses for it." He was right, and Violet's mind was already racing. With $2,000 they could expand the restaurant significantly, maybe even buy the building next door and double their space. They could hire help, allowing them both more time together. They could build a real life, a prosperous one. "What do you think?" Bennett asked, turning to her. "I think the sheriff is right," Violet said slowly. "I know you do not want to profit from what you had to do, but this money represents justice being served. The territorial governments offered these rewards because the Fletcher gang was terrorizing innocent people. You stopped them. You should not be punished for that by refusing the compensation you are owed." Bennett looked at the papers the sheriff had laid on the table, his expression troubled. "If I take this money, we use it for building something good, something that has nothing to do with guns or violence." "That is exactly what we will do," Violet promised. "We will build a future with it, a good future." He nodded slowly. "All right, thank you, Sheriff, for handling this." "It is my job," Patterson said. He stood, wincing as his bad leg protested. "There is one more thing. The territorial governor in New Mexico has asked if you would be willing to testify at Marcus Fletcher's parole hearing in a few years. Your testimony about what the gang did to Thomas Kowalski could help ensure he stays behind bars for the full term of his sentence." Violet felt Bennett tense again, and she put her hand on his arm. "He will think about it," she said firmly. "But not tonight. Tonight we have had enough talk of the past." The sheriff smiled. "Fair enough. You folks have a good evening, and Bradford, welcome home. Ouray is lucky to have you." After the sheriff left, Bennett sat in silence for a long moment. Violet waited, knowing he needed to process everything. $2,000, he finally said. "I never expected anything like that." "Life is full of surprises," Violet said. "Some of them are even good." He turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Marry me," he said. Violet's heart skipped a beat. "What? Marry me?" he repeated. "I know we said we would wait longer, make sure we were both certain, but Violet, I am certain. I have been certain since the day I rode back into Ouray. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are beside me and go to sleep every night holding you in my arms. I want to expand that restaurant and make it the best dining establishment in all of Colorado. I want to have children with you and grow old watching them grow up in this town. I want all of it, everything, and I want it with you." Tears were streaming down Violet's face, but she was smiling. "You are supposed to ask properly. Get down on one knee and everything." Bennett laughed, a sound of pure joy, and dropped to one knee beside her chair. He took her hands in his dark eyes looking up at her with such love that she felt her heart might burst. "Violet Kowalski, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said, pulling him up so she could kiss him. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church on the edge of town. Violet wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in tissue paper, and carried a bouquet of late autumn wildflowers that Bennett had ridden into the mountains to collect. Bennett wore a new suit purchased specially for the occasion, his dark hair neatly trimmed and his face clean-shaven. Half the town turned out for the ceremony. The miners came in their Sunday best, shuffling awkwardly in the pews but grinning broadly. The shopkeepers closed up for the afternoon to attend. Even Sheriff Patterson was there, sitting in the back row with his wife. Father Domingo performed the ceremony, his Spanish-accented English giving the traditional vows a musical quality that made them seem even more sacred. When he pronounced them man and wife and Bennett kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. They held the reception at the restaurant, which they had closed for the day and decorated with ribbons and flowers. Violet had spent the previous week cooking and baking, determined that her wedding feast would be something people remembered. There was roast beef and chicken, mashed potatoes and gravy, fresh vegetables, pies and cakes, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Bennett danced with Violet until her feet ached, holding her close and whispering words of love in her ear that made her blush. When someone asked him to tell the story of how he had tracked down the Fletcher gang, he politely declined. "That was another life," he said, his arm around Violet's waist. "Tonight is about the future, not the past." Finally, as the last guests were leaving and the moon was rising over the mountains, Bennett swept Violet into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home. She laughed, clinging to his neck as he kicked the door shut behind them and carried her up the stairs to the bedroom they would now share. He set her down gently beside the bed, his hands coming up to cup her face. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You came back to me, Bennett. You kept your promise, and now we get to start our life together." "I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you happy," he promised. "You saved me, Violet. When I laid those revolvers on your kitchen table, I did not know if I would ever find peace again. But you gave me hope. You gave me a reason to believe I could be more than what I had become." "You were always more," she said softly. "You just needed someone to remind you." Their first year of marriage was busy and challenging and wonderful. With the reward money, they purchased the building next door to the restaurant and expanded, doubling their seating capacity and adding a kitchen large enough for Violet to work comfortably even during the busiest times. They hired 2 local girls to help with serving and cleaning, giving them both time to focus on growing the business. The restaurant thrived. Word spread throughout the mining camps and surrounding ranches that Kowalski's Cafe served the best food between Denver and Telluride. Travelers would go out of their way to stop in Ouray just to eat one of Violet's meals. Bennett proved to have a head for business, managing the finances and negotiating with suppliers in a way that kept their costs down and their profits up. But it was not all work. Bennett made sure they took time to enjoy their life together. On Sundays, when the restaurant was closed, they would pack a picnic and ride into the mountains, exploring the valleys and meadows that surrounded Ouray. Bennett taught Violet to ride better, and she taught him to appreciate the small beauties of nature he had overlooked during his years of hunting. In the evenings, after the restaurant closed, they would sit together on the porch swing Bennett had built, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Bennett would talk about his dreams for the future, plans to eventually buy a small ranch where they could raise horses and cattle alongside running the restaurant. Violet would talk about the children she wanted to have, at least 3 or 4, filling the house with laughter and love. The nightmares became less frequent as the months passed. There were still nights when Bennett would wake gasping, reaching for weapons that were not there, but Violet learned how to soothe him, holding him close and murmuring reassurances until he calmed. Slowly, the past loosened its grip on him, becoming a memory rather than a constant presence. Their first anniversary came on a crisp autumn day, exactly 1 year after their wedding. Bennett surprised Violet by closing the restaurant for the entire day, something they had not done since their wedding. He refused to tell her what he had planned, just instructed her to dress warmly and be ready to ride by dawn. They rode out of Ouray as the sun was rising, heading south into the mountains. After an hour, they reached a small valley Violet had never seen before, sheltered by tall peaks and crossed by a clear stream. There, in the middle of the valley, stood a partially completed cabin. "What is this?" Violet asked, staring in amazement. "This is our ranch," Bennett said, dismounting and coming to help her down. "I've been coming out here 3 times a week for the past 6 months, working on it during the hours when the restaurant is closed. Tom Harris and some of the miners have been helping. It is not much yet, just the basic structure, but I wanted to have something to show you on our anniversary." Violet walked around the cabin, taking in the solid log construction and the large windows that would let in plenty of light. It was bigger than she had expected, with room for a proper kitchen, a living area, and several bedrooms. "You did this for us?" she asked, her voice catching. "I did this for our future," Bennett said, coming to stand beside her. "The restaurant is doing well, better than we ever hoped. We have enough now that we can afford to expand in a different direction. I thought maybe we could start small, just a few horses and some cattle, and run it alongside the restaurant. Eventually, maybe in a few years, we could hire someone to manage the cafe and focus on ranching." This valley has good water and grazing, and it is close enough to town that we could ride back and forth easily." "It is perfect," Violet breathed. "Absolutely perfect." He pulled something from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. It was a deed, officially recorded with the county, showing that he had purchased the land and the water rights. The property was in both their names. "Happy anniversary," he said softly. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him with all the love and joy bursting from her heart. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you so much, Bennett Bradford." "I love you too," he replied. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." They spent the day at the cabin, eating the picnic lunch Violet had packed and making plans for the future. Bennett showed her where he intended to build the barn and corrals, where they could plant a garden, where the horses could graze. They talked about what breeds of cattle would do best in the mountain climate, and how many horses they should start with. As the sun was setting and they were preparing to ride back to Ouray, Violet turned to Bennett with a smile. "I have an anniversary gift for you too," she said. "You did not need to get me anything," he protested. "It is not something I bought." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Bennett. I am about 3 months along. I wanted to be sure before I told you." The look on his face was everything she could have hoped for. Wonder and joy and a touch of fear all mixed together. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "We are," she confirmed. "Around May, if my calculations are correct." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Violet, we are going to have a family." "We are," she agreed, happiness flooding through her. "A real family in our own home, building the life we always dreamed of." That night, riding back to Ouray under a sky full of stars, with Bennett's arm around her waist and their future stretching bright before them, Violet felt a peace she had not known since before her mother died. All the grief, all the loss, all the lonely years of waiting, they had led to this moment. They had led to Bennett laying his revolvers on her kitchen table and saying he was done carrying them for her. They had led to love and partnership and a future filled with promise. The baby came on a warm May afternoon, announcing his arrival with lusty cries that could be heard throughout the house. Bennett paced outside the bedroom door, driven out by the midwife who insisted he would only be in the way. When the midwife finally emerged and told him he had a son, he rushed past her to Violet's side. She lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Bennett took the baby with trembling hands, staring down at the small red face in wonder. "He is perfect," he breathed. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree on anything that felt right. But now, looking at this tiny new life they had created together, Violet knew exactly what his name should be. "Thomas," she said. "Thomas Bennett Bradford, after my brother and his father." Bennett's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I know how much you still miss Thomas." "I miss him every day," Violet admitted. "But this is not about replacing him. This is about honoring his memory and making sure that our son knows the kind of man his uncle was. Brave and loyal and good. I want him to carry that name with pride." "Thomas Bennett Bradford," Bennett repeated, trying it out. "It is a good name, a strong name." He looked down at his son, who had stopped crying and was staring up at him with unfocused blue eyes. "Welcome to the world, Thomas. You have the best mother in the entire territory, and I promise you, I will do everything in my power to be the father you deserve." The next few years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Young Thomas thrived, growing from a tiny infant into a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's bright smile. The restaurant continued to prosper, becoming such an institution in Ouray that travelers would ride ahead to reserve tables during the busy summer months. The ranch, which they had named the T-Barquet after Thomas, Bennett, and Kowalski, grew slowly but steadily. Bennett spent 3 days a week at the ranch, building up their herd of cattle and horses, while Violet managed the restaurant with the help of their expanded staff. It was exhausting work, but it was the good kind of exhaustion that came from building something meaningful. When Thomas was 2 years old, Violet discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, leaving her tired and nauseous for months. Bennett worried constantly, hovering over her until she finally snapped at him to give her some breathing room. "I am not made of glass," she said irritably one morning when he tried to insist she stay in bed instead of going to the restaurant. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am perfectly capable of working while pregnant." "I know that," Bennett said, hurt evident in his voice. "I just want to take care of you." Violet immediately felt guilty. "I know you do. I am sorry. I am just tired and uncomfortable and taking it out on you. That is not fair." He pulled her into his arms, careful of her swollen belly. "You are allowed to be tired and uncomfortable. You are growing another human being. That is hard work. Still, I should not snap at you." She rested her head against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "You have been nothing but wonderful through all of this." "I am terrified," he admitted. "Every day I wake up afraid that something will go wrong, that I will lose you or the baby. I could not bear it, Violet. You and Thomas, you are my whole world." "Nothing is going to go wrong," she said, even though she shared his fears. "The midwife says everything is progressing normally. This baby is just making me work harder than Thomas did. That is all." Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning, smaller than Thomas had been, but with a set of lungs that proved she was just as healthy. Bennett held her while the midwife tended to Violet, talking to the tiny girl in a voice filled with wonder. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "You gave us quite a scare, coming early like that. But you are here now, safe and sound, and your mother and I love you more than you will ever know." "What should we name her?" Violet asked when Bennett brought the baby to her. "I was thinking about my grandmother," Bennett said. "Her name was Beatrice. She was the kindest, strongest woman I ever knew aside from you. She raised me after my mother died, taught me everything important about being a decent person." "Beatrice Bradford," Violet said, testing the name. "Beatrice Violet Bradford, I like it. She will be strong like your grandmother and have my middle name to remind her of me." "Beatrice Violet Bradford," Bennett agreed. "Welcome to our family, little B." With 2 small children and 2 businesses to run, life became even more hectic. Bennett hired on extra help for the ranch, 2 young cowboys named Jack and Sam who were willing to work hard for fair wages. This freed him up to spend more time at home, helping with the children while Violet recovered from childbirth, and gradually returned to her work at the restaurant. Thomas was a good big brother, surprisingly gentle with his baby sister despite being only 2 years old himself. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, talking to her in his toddler babble and bringing her toys he thought she might like. Bennett would watch them together with a look of such profound love and contentment that it made Violet's heart swell. "This is what I dreamed of," he told her one night as they lay in bed, exhausted from the day's activities. "All those years when I was hunting the Fletcher gang, living hard and lonely, this is what I imagined. Coming home to you, having children, building a life that mattered. I never really believed it would happen, but here we are." "Here we are," Violet agreed, snuggling closer to him. "And I would not change a single thing about it. Not even the part where you had to wait 3 years for me to come back. Especially not that part," she said firmly. "Because if you had not left, You would not have been able to lay those revolvers on my kitchen table and tell me you were done carrying them. You would not have known that you could choose a different life, and we might not have had the courage to admit how we felt about each other." Bennett was quiet for a moment, then kissed the top of her head. "I still think about them sometimes," he admitted. "The revolvers, the men I killed. It does not haunt me the way it used to, but it is always there, a part of my past." "That is all right," Violet said. "It will always be part of who you are, but it does not define you anymore. Now you are defined by this, by us, by our family, by the life we have built." "You are right," he said. "You are always right." She smiled in the darkness. "You should remember that." When Thomas was 5 and Beatrice was 3, Violet became pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was easier than the previous 2, and she worked right up until the day her labor started. Their second daughter was born on a beautiful spring morning, healthy and strong, with a full head of dark hair. "She looks like you," Violet told Bennett as he held the newborn. "She looks like an angel," he replied, completely besotted. "What should we name her?" "I want to name her after my mother," Violet said. "Catherine. Catherine Rose Bradford." "Catherine Rose," Bennett repeated. "It is beautiful, just like she is, just like her mother." With 3 children under the age of 5, Bennett and Violet made the difficult decision to step back from the day-to-day operation of the restaurant. They hired a manager, a capable woman named Martha Davis, who had worked for them for 2 years and knew the business inside and out. Violet still created the recipes and supervised the kitchen several days a week, but she was no longer responsible for being there every day from dawn to dusk. This gave them more time to focus on the ranch, which was growing into a profitable operation. They had built up a quality herd of cattle and had started breeding horses, specializing in sturdy mountain horses that could handle the rough terrain around Ouray. Bennett's reputation for honesty and fair dealing had spread, and they had customers coming from as far as Denver to purchase their livestock. They divided their time between the house in Ouray and the ranch, spending summers at the ranch where the children could run and play in the open spaces, and winters in town where it was easier to keep warm and the children could attend school. It was the best of both worlds, and their family thrived. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with his father on the ranch, already showing signs of the good man he would become. Beatrice was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into everything. Catherine was the baby of the family, sweet-natured and content, happy as long as she was near her mother. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Bennett and Violet stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside, supposedly getting ready for bed, but more likely playing instead. They could hear Thomas's deeper voice trying to wrangle his sisters, and both parents smiled. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Violet asked, leaning against Bennett's side. "Some days it feels like a lifetime," he said. "Other days it feels like just yesterday that I laid those revolvers on your kitchen table." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up that life? Sometimes I wonder if you miss the excitement, the adventure." Bennett turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Violet, look at me. Really look at me. Do I look like a man with regrets?" She studied his face, seeing the peace there, the contentment, the deep happiness that radiated from him. "No," she admitted. "You look like a man who is exactly where he wants to be." "That is because I am," he said firmly. "Every good thing in my life started the day I walked through your door and told you I was done being a hunter. You gave me a reason to believe I could be something different, something better. You gave me love and a family and a purpose that has nothing to do with violence or death. I have spent the past 10 years building instead of destroying, creating instead of taking away. That is worth more to me than all the excitement and adventure in the world. I love you, Violet said, her voice thick with emotion. I loved you when you rode back into Ouray covered in dust and carrying those revolvers. I loved you when you were struggling with nightmares and guilt. I loved you when you built that cabin with your own hands. And I love you now, standing here with our children inside and our future stretching out before us. I love you too, Bennett replied. I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if such a thing is possible. You are my everything, Violet Bradford. You always have been and you always will be. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 10 years of partnership and love. Inside the house, they heard Thomas's voice raised in exasperation as one of his sisters refused to cooperate, and they broke apart laughing. We should probably go rescue him, Violet said. Probably, Bennett agreed. But let us just stand here for one more moment, just the two of us, looking at this beautiful life we have built. They stood together in the fading light, arms around each other, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. Below them, the lights of Ouray twinkled in the valley. Beyond them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, silent witnesses to the life they had created together. Years continued to flow like water, each one adding depth and richness to their story. Thomas grew into a young man of 17, tall and strong like his father, with a natural gift for working with horses. He had taken over much of the ranch's day-to-day operations, allowing Bennett to focus on the business side and spend more time with his younger daughters. Beatrice, at 15, had inherited her mother's love of cooking and was already talking about opening her own restaurant someday. She spent hours in the kitchen with Violet, learning recipes and techniques, her quick mind absorbing everything her mother could teach her. She had also inherited Bennett's head for business, and was always coming up with ideas for how to expand or improve their operations. Catherine, at 13, was the quietest of the 3 children but also the most observant. She loved to read and write, filling journals with her observations about life on the ranch and in Ouray. Violet suspected she would grow up to be a writer or a teacher, something that required her thoughtful intelligence. Bennett was 43 now, with silver threading through his dark hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He moved a bit slower than he used to, his old wounds sometimes aching in cold weather, but he was still strong and vital. He still kissed Violet every morning like she was the most precious thing in the world. He still looked at her across the dinner table with love and admiration after all these years. Violet was 40, her figure a bit rounder than it had been in her youth, but still strong from years of hard work. Her hair had a few strands of silver too, and there were lines on her face that had not been there when Bennett first laid those revolvers on her table. But she felt more beautiful now than she ever had in her youth, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and valued. One afternoon in late summer, Sheriff Patterson rode out to the ranch. He was in his 70s now and had talked about retiring, but Ouray kept electing him sheriff because no one else wanted the job and he was still capable despite his age. "Bennett, Violet," he said, dismounting stiffly. "Hope I am not disturbing you." "Never a disturbance, Sheriff," Bennett said, coming forward to shake his hand. "What brings you out this way?" Patterson pulled an envelope from his coat. "This came for you through official channels. It is from the territorial prison in New Mexico. Marcus Fletcher is up for parole." Bennett's expression went carefully blank. "I see. They are asking if you want to testify at the hearing," Patterson continued. "Your testimony about what the Fletcher gang did to Thomas Kowalski could impact whether he is released early or serves his full sentence. He has been in prison for 17 years now. He is due for parole review." Violet watched her husband's face, seeing the old shadows flicker across his features. They had not talked about the Fletcher gang in years. Those revolvers were still locked in her father's trunk upstairs, untouched and forgotten. That chapter of their lives had been closed for so long that it seemed like it belonged to different people. "What do you want to do?" she asked Bennett quietly. He looked at the envelope in Patterson's hand for a long moment. "I want to let it go," he said finally. "Marcus Fletcher has been in prison for 17 years. He was young when it all happened, barely more than a boy led astray by his older brother. If the parole board thinks he has been rehabilitated, then that is their decision to make. I do not need to be part of it." "You are sure?" Patterson asked. "This man was part of the gang that killed your friend." "I am sure," Bennett said firmly. "I spent 3 years of my life hunting justice for Thomas Kowalski. I did what needed to be done, and then I moved on. I built a life, a good life, and I am not going to let the past pull me back into darkness. Whatever Marcus Fletcher does with his future is between him and his conscience. I am done carrying that burden." Patterson nodded slowly. "I will let them know." "For what it is worth, Bennett, I think you are making the right choice. A man has to know when to let go." After the sheriff left, Violet found Bennett standing in the barn staring out at the mountains. She came up beside him and slipped her hand into his. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am," he said, and she could hear the truth in his voice. "When Patterson mentioned the Fletcher gang, I felt this moment of old anger and pain. But then I looked around at this ranch, at the life we have built, at our children, and I realized that none of it matters anymore. Thomas has been dead for 20 years. I avenged him a long time ago. Holding on to it now would just be poison." "You have grown into such a wise man," Violet said softly. "I had a good teacher," he replied, pulling her close. "You taught me that there is more to life than justice and vengeance. You taught me about forgiveness and moving forward and building instead of destroying. I am the man I am today because of you." "We built this together," she corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are, we did it together." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children in the distance. Thomas was working with a young horse in the corral, patient and gentle. Beatrice was hanging laundry on the line, singing to herself. Catherine was sitting under a tree with a book, completely absorbed in the story. "We did good, did we not?" Bennett asked. "With them, with our life, with everything." "We did very good," Violet agreed. "And we are not done yet. We have years ahead of us still, years to watch them grow and build their own lives, years to grow old together." "I cannot wait," Bennett said, and she heard the smile in his voice. "Growing old with you sounds like the best adventure I could ask for." True to his word, Bennett never looked back. The past stayed where it belonged, a foundation for the present but no longer a weight dragging him down. He and Violet continued to build their life together, watching their children grow into adults who made them proud. Thomas married a girl from town named Sarah, and they took over the full operation of the ranch. He ran it with the same integrity and skill his father had shown, and soon they were welcoming their own children into the world. Bennett became a grandfather at 45, holding his grandson with the same wonder he had held his own children. Beatrice did eventually open her own restaurant in Denver, a fancy establishment that became known throughout Colorado for its excellent food and service. She visited Ouray often, bringing new recipes to share with her mother and stories about city life that made everyone laugh. Catherine became a teacher, just as Violet had suspected. She taught in Ouray's school, passing on her love of learning to new generations of children. She never married, content with her work and her family, and she became the favorite aunt who always had time for her nieces and nephews. Bennett and Violet moved permanently to the ranch when they were in their 50s, leaving the house in Ouray to Catherine. They spent their days working side by side, though the work was lighter now with Thomas running things. They tended the garden together, fixed fences, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch swing Bennett had built so many years ago and watch the sunset. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house was full of laughter and noise and love. 3 generations of family that had grown from the moment Bennett laid his revolvers on Violet's kitchen table and chose a different path. After dinner, when the children were playing outside and the adults were cleaning up, Thomas pulled his father aside. "I have something for you," he said, leading Bennett to the barn. There, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, were the 2 revolvers Bennett had carried so long ago. Thomas had found them in the trunk in Ouray and brought them to the ranch. "I thought you might want them," Thomas said. "Not to use, obviously, but maybe to keep as a reminder of where you came from, what you overcame." Bennett looked at the weapons, remembering the weight of them, the way they had felt in his hands. He remembered the men he had tracked, the justice he had served, the long, lonely years before he came home to Violet, and he felt nothing. No anger, no guilt, no longing for that life. "Thank you, son," he said, wrapping the revolvers back up. "But I do not need them. That part of my life is over, has been over for 30 years. If you want to keep them as family history, that is fine. But make sure your children know the whole story. Make sure they understand that I gave up those revolvers by choice, that I chose your mother and family and building a life over living by the gun. That is the lesson worth remembering." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I will make sure they know, Dad. I will make sure they understand what you and Mom built together, how you changed your life." That night, lying in bed with Violet beside him, Bennett thought about the long path his life had taken. From a young cowboy on a Texas ranch to a hunter seeking justice to a husband and father and rancher. Every step had led him here to this moment, to this woman who had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. "What are you thinking about?" Violet asked sleepily, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Bennett said. "How one decision, one moment of choosing love over vengeance changed everything. If I had not come back to you, if I had kept carrying those revolvers and living that life, I would have missed all of this. I would have missed our family, our ranch, 30 years of waking up beside you." "But you did come back," Violet said. "You laid those revolvers on my table and told me you were done carrying them, and we built this beautiful life together. That is what matters." "That is what matters," he agreed, pulling her close. "I love you, Violet Bradford. I have loved you for 35 years, and I will love you for 35 more if we are blessed with that much time." "I love you too," she murmured. "Always have, always will." They drifted off to sleep together, surrounded by the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that they had chosen well all those years ago. Bennett and Violet were blessed with more years together. They watched their grandchildren grow, welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, and continued to be the heart of their family even as age began to slow them down. The ranch thrived under Thomas's management, and the family name became synonymous with quality livestock and honest dealing throughout Colorado. Bennett was 72 when he finally had to admit that his old wounds and hard life were catching up with him. He moved slower, tired more easily, but his mind was sharp, and his love for Violet as strong as ever. She was 69, silver-haired and grandmotherly, still cooking for the family gatherings and tending her garden with Beatrice's help when she visited. One evening in early autumn, they sat on their porch swing as the sun set behind the mountains. The air was cool and crisp, promising the winter to come. Bennett held Violet's hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her skin as it had for so many years. "You remember the day I came back?" he asked suddenly. "Every detail," Violet replied. "You were covered in dust and exhaustion, and you laid those revolvers on my kitchen table like they were the heaviest burden you had ever carried." "They were," Bennett said quietly. "Until that moment, I did not realize how much I hated them, what they represented. Laying them down, choosing you, choosing this life, it was like I could finally breathe again." "I was so scared that day," Violet admitted. "I had waited 3 years, and then there you were, looking at me like I was the answer to every question you had ever asked. I was terrified I would say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, and you would leave again." "There was never any chance of that," Bennett assured her. "I came back for you, Violet, only for you, and you gave me more than I ever dreamed possible. A home, a family, a purpose, love that sustained me through every challenge. You made me a better man." "We made each other better," Violet corrected. "That is what love does. It challenges us and supports us and helps us become the best version of ourselves." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to emerge. Down the hill, they could see lights in Thomas and Sarah's house, hear the distant sounds of children playing. The ranch was alive and thriving, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. "I have no regrets," Bennett said suddenly. "I wanted you to know that. When my time comes, whenever that is, I will go without regrets. I lived a good life, a meaningful life because of you." "Stop talking about dying," Violet said, squeezing his hand. "You are going to live to be 100 and ornery as a mule the whole time." He laughed, the sound still warm and full despite his age. "If I do, it will only be because I am too stubborn to leave you. Who else would put up with me?" "No one," she said with mock severity. "Which is why you better stick around." Bennett lived to be 78 years old. He passed peacefully in his sleep one winter night, with Violet beside him as she had been for almost 50 years. The whole family gathered for his funeral, 3 generations coming together to honor the man who had chosen love over violence, building over destroying, family over everything else. Violet stood at his graveside, her hand in Thomas's, and looked out over the ranch they had built together. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the same mountains that had witnessed their love story unfold over 5 decades. "He was a good man," Thomas said quietly. "The best," Violet agreed. "He came back when he could have kept running. He chose us when he could have chosen revenge. He built this when he could have destroyed. That is who your father was, and that is what I want you to remember." After the funeral, when everyone had gone home and Violet was alone in the house she had shared with Bennett, she climbed the stairs to their bedroom. There, in the bottom of the old trunk that had belonged to her father, were the revolvers Bennett had laid on her kitchen table 50 years ago. She unwrapped them carefully, looking at the weapons that had once defined her husband's life. They were tarnished now, neglected, no longer the deadly tools they had once been. Just pieces of metal and wood, remnants of a past that no longer had power. Violet wrapped them back up and placed them in the trunk. They would stay there, a reminder of where they had come from, but not a burden anymore. Just history, just a chapter in a much longer, much more beautiful story. She lived another 6 years without Bennett, though a part of her died the night he did. She spent her time with her children and grandchildren, passing on recipes and stories, making sure they understood the history of their family. She told them about the day Bennett came back, about the revolvers on the table, about the choice he made to put down his weapons and pick up a different life. "That is what courage really is," she would tell them. "It is not carrying guns and hunting bad men. It is choosing to be vulnerable to love, to build something that can be destroyed. Your grandfather had that kind of courage, and because he did, All of you are here today. When Violet passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 75, she was buried beside Bennett on a hill overlooking the ranch. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood at the graveside, mourning but also celebrating lives well lived. Thomas gave the eulogy, his voice steady despite his grief. "My parents taught me that love is a choice you make every day. My father chose my mother when he laid down his revolvers and decided to build instead of destroy. My mother chose my father when she saw past the violence of his past to the goodness of his heart. They chose each other every day for 50 years, through hard times and good times, through success and struggle. And because they made that choice, because they built this family and this ranch and this legacy, we are all here today. That is their gift to us. That is what we must remember and honor." The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's stewardship and eventually his sons after him. The revolvers remained in the trunk, sometimes taken out for grandchildren to see while the story was told of how Bennett Bradford came back to Ouray, Colorado in 1882, and laid his weapons on Violet Kowalski's kitchen table, declaring he was done carrying them for her. It became a family legend, passed down through generations, a story about courage and choice and love, and in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, marked simply with names and dates. But anyone who knew the story understood that those simple stones represented something much greater. They represented a love that transformed lives, a choice that changed everything, and a legacy that would endure as long as the mountains stood watch over the valley below. The restaurant in Ouray eventually closed, unable to compete with newer establishments, but the Bradford family name remained respected throughout Colorado. The ranch became one of the most successful in the state, known for quality livestock and the integrity of its owners. And every generation of Bradfords made sure their children knew the story of how it all began with a cowboy laying down his revolvers and choosing love over vengeance. Decades later, when Bennett and Violet's great-great-grandchildren played on the same land where their ancestors had built their life together, they would sometimes find old coins or buttons or bits of metal worked into the soil. And their parents would tell them that this land was special, that it had been purchased with the reward money from bringing outlaws to justice, and built up with the sweat and love of 2 people who chose each other against all odds. The story of Bennett and Violet Bradford became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of choosing a different path, of laying down weapons and picking up love, of building instead of destroying. Their love story, which began when Bennett laid his revolvers on Violet's kitchen table and declared he was done carrying them for her, echoed through generations as proof that one moment, one choice, one act of courage could change everything. And somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, in a valley where a clear stream still runs and the grass still grows green in summer, the land remembers. It remembers the man who came home carrying the weight of justice, served and laid down his burden. It remembers the woman who waited and believed and loved with a fierce determination. It remembers the family they built, the legacy they created, and the love that sustained them through 50 years of marriage and beyond. That is the story of he laid his revolvers on her kitchen table. The cowboy said, "I'm done carrying these for you." It is a story of redemption and love, of choices made and kept, of violence set aside in favor of building something beautiful. And it is a story that, like all the best love stories, never really ends. It lives on in the descendants who carry their names, in the land they worked together, and in the legacy of love they left behind.